If you were to give up what you did professionally, what would you do instead?
Sustainability.
Tell me more.
I'm quite involved in the automotive industry and helping with this whole transition. And I do it more from a business transformation perspective, but helping switch to renewable resources. So I'm from Canada, a huge country. We haven't, I don't think, embraced it in the way that we should in terms of sustainability, sustainable living, huge homes, freeways, the North American lifestyle, right? You drive everywhere in a car for the most part.
Yeah.
So I think it would be around, the sustainability agenda and making that transition. That I've always been interested in that. Something even down to, helping with the uptick of solar or even charging stations. Something very practical, something that helps everyone. It's, democratizing, let's say, renewable energies, I think is a big topic. And maybe I will find myself in that space one day.
I mean, you drive a bike to work, so you're kind of living that idea of sustainability. But when you're talking about sustainability these days, the definition keeps changing depending on who you're talking to. You would like to define what you mean by sustainability. Obviously, it means such a lot to you.
I think sustainability, it's what you do concretely, your actions, right? So, but I also think it's a mindset thing. We live in Dubai. I know Dubai, they're doing a lot now moving towards sustainability, but I think it's how you live your life. I think it's more of a mindset on an individual level. And I think helping with the awareness, but then also making that transition easy for people. I think that sustainability needs to be something that is a way of living and it's integrated into your life from, recyclables to how you power your home to how you commute. It's all part of it because it's basically down to your footprint, right? Like how much are you using of the earth's resources? We all need to collectively reduce that.
When you're talking about not making sure we don't destroy ecosystems and we don't, go after a goal and forget what is the byproduct of going after that goal, it feels like sustainability is part of that equation where we understand the impact we are having across the board, and maybe that's something that I don't know whether you've thought about or not thought about, and I'd love to get your comments on that. And is there a way to educate our kids? I mean, because that would probably be the biggest impact, not only about us doing the small things, but maybe educating them on what is sustainability and how to think about doing anything.
The awareness on an individual level needs to be built up, and especially in countries where products and consumerism is given as a granted. For instance, here in Dubai, again, everything is delivered, everything is pre-packaged. When I first moved into my building, this is actually a bright spot, and I think it's a great thing. So my wife and I, coming from Germany, you recycle everything. Here, when we first came, I'm in a building of 400 probably, at 37 floors. Yeah, around 400, and there is, those Rubbermaid containers in the basement, for the entire building. When we first moved there, this container was always half full. Fast forward to today, and we recycle everything. Even the plastic wrap for our fruits and veg, we will put into the plastic and we'll take it down. Today, you go down there, and it is always overflowing with people that are recycling. So the awareness, I think, is coming about. People are doing it consciously because they know that, collectively it makes it different. And I think that people knowing that on an individual level, if everyone is making those sort of improvements or those efficiencies or contributing on a collective level, that's actually making a big impact. And I think that switch, understanding that you're part of a bigger thing, the more and more people that get that and that actually practice that, it will make an impact.
Yeah. You focus on CRM and data insights for business development and across different regions.
Yeah.
When you think about you becoming President and Chief Growth Officer for RAPP in the MENA region, can you share what that journey was like for you and what are the highlights?
I was in Qatar before for the World Cup, helping with the digital infrastructure there, which was incredibly interesting to help with a mega tournament there. And sustainability also was part of that conversation as well, which is great to see that they were making strides there. Coming to here, post-COVID, what we do, CRM precision marketing using first-party data. When I first came to the region about 3 years ago, that wasn't really a topic. Well, let's say it was a topic, but it didn't really have a place in the market. And what I mean by that is pre-COVID, there was obviously applications and stuff running here, but it wasn't a thing where you would have a lot of customer data to help drive interactions and personalization. Post-COVID, because people had to stay at home, they had to get things delivered, they had to get used to using applications for a multitude of different parts of their life, right? They became, let's say, comfortable with it, and this industry blew up. There was no real order to it. There wasn't really, people still think CRM is emailers, where it's much more about, business transformation and how do we apply business intelligence to reach out and to effectively communicate with your customer base in that adds authentic value. And that's what we do here. We're not a marketing company. We help brands and the business that is behind the brand to drive business growth.
Right.
And we do that through the brand and through brand communications.
So what was that journey like, considering, I want to get into Qatar and, head of digital services there in a second. But when you look back, what are the things and highlights that kind of prepared you maybe for this role to be here?
We operate like a startup. So I think when I came into the company, it wasn't necessarily living and breathing the CRM aspect. It was the company was positioned to service a market in more of a traditional creative way, traditional comms. And when I came in, I had to basically recalibrate the company, how it operated, and really go into the space of CRM and precision marketing, because that was a growing market sector, but it hadn't really defined itself. So I had to, let's say, transform our product offering, but at the same time had to sort of carve out a space within the market of what CRM and precision marketing is. That was a lot of work, and in Dubai and in the region, things are moving at lightning speed. And if you're not sort of top of mind, if it's not, let's say, the elevator pitch of what you do, and that actually can reflect a business need or business needs within the market, you're going to have a hard time finding traction. So it's really trying to find out what that narrative is. What is that elevator pitch? Really demonstrating, business value, and then going for it. And then whilst doing that, having to scale and reposition the company, bring it back into profitability and growth, and ensuring that the clients understand what you do and why you do it.
You mentioned CRM and precision marketing a lot.
Yeah.
I think what I really want to get into the meat and potatoes of this interview is data insights. Artificial intelligence is a big topic right now, and AI is kind of useless if the data going in is not the right data. But I'd first love for you to explain to us what is CRM and what is precision marketing, and how you can integrate these data insights into developing a strategic business initiative.
CRM is all around first-party data, and first-party data is identifiable data. So, for instance, I'm Curtis Schmidt, that's my name, my phone number, my email address, so I can be identified as an individual. That's, in a nutshell, what CRM data is, first-party data. And that first-party data can go into a much broader data set, in terms of what, you can call even a golden record, or, a 360-degree view of the customer, where you have behavioral data, interaction data, device data, and that can all basically go into, let's say, a unified profile of who this person is based off of identifiable and non-identifiable data that forms a view of that person. CRM data and first-party data are becoming very important in terms of precision marketing in the data value chain, like, let's say, at the end of the day, AI, because the data landscape in general is changing. The deprecation of the cookie is becoming a real thing. So media data, it's becoming a cookieless world. And what that means is essentially you can't start using the data that's collected on websites for retargeting purposes as easily as you once could. First-party data, you can essentially use that data to enrich your targeting activities throughout a customer's interaction journey with you. So first-party data, CRM data, precision marketing can help you with retargeting within media. So advertisements when you're in SEO or on a Google page and you're having those banner ads, to a website and real-time interaction. So what are you looking for? How does the website evolve and become more personal based off of what pages you're looking at, through to purchasing that product, and then the customer life cycle of owning that product. Precision marketing essentially helps you out with all of that, where it's using first-party data as a catalyst or the bedrock, and then enriching all of those other data points through what you can use, for instance, a clean room, where you're starting to stitch together other data. It gets a little bit complicated, but this is essentially what we do. And through the stitching together of data, you can start taking data of an individual to content to content. So like the content itself, like the creative application is meta tagged as well. And you can basically connect the dot between a personal individual's data and content data, and then that will be served up onto that touch point. And the more data that you have about that individual, the more precise you can be. And the more precise you can be, the more stitching together can happen with those different content pieces. And then that real-time interaction can happen. So if you think about Netflix has over 1 million different content pieces. So for instance, if you were to take Good Will Hunting, if I, for instance, have a different, my list or my shows viewed might have a different profile than what you viewed. Right. And then when we both look at Good Will Hunting, for me, it might be a scene of Matt Damon and Robin sitting on a bench, where versus you, it might be, I don't know, them sitting in one of the rooms down below having some beers based off of the data that is being extracted.
Collected.
So that's essentially what we do. And then behind that is then the predictive, and then the machine learning, then ultimately the artificial intelligence.
I love it. Thank you for that explanation, because we all have access to data in some capacity, whether it was small business, medium business, big business. And that is becoming more and more important to be used and have relevance in how we operate. What's the best way to start using that data? Now, when you start collecting them is one thing, but then using that and then using that ethically, how does that all fit into the picture?
First, collecting, you can collect, a plethora, endless data on people, right? There's a lot of data out there. It's collecting the right data, and it needs to map back to ultimately your business goals, right? Like, what are you as a business trying to do? And that data needs to be collected in an ethical way that's consented, and there needs to be a value exchange, right? So previously, with, for instance, old school CRM or traditional marketing, there was some sort of incentive outside of making value through the product itself. So coupons, discounts, rebates, whatever it was, to incentivize that value exchange between individual and company. And that value exchange is let's say the facilitator is the data. When you know that you are providing true value, is that you don't have to incentivize things to get that data from the consumer. So they have to see that data that you're receiving from them will enrich the experience, which will allow them to find the products and the services that they want quicker, faster, smarter. That's the silver bullet. And then in doing that, you need to be asking yourself, what data do I actually need to collect to make that value exchange smooth and seamless, right? And authentic. And if you have to collect more data, or data that is, going to be used for some form of artificial incentivization, so a rebate or whatever, you're probably missing the mark. You really have to get at the crux of why is that consumer or that customer speaking with you, and how do you ask for their data to then truly and authentically enrich that relationship, so there's a value exchange. They give you the data, you give the product or service in a more efficient, better way that they wouldn't have received without you using the data to deliver it.
Right. So the value creation is the key.
Absolutely. Authentic value creation.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that customer is coming to you for a specific purpose, and you need to make that as lean and as convenient as possible.
I love that. I mean, you've been working in different places, North America, Europe, China, now Middle East.
Yeah.
How has the different cultures and the approach to how they do business, has it changed your view of marketing and your approach to marketing? How has that influenced you?
Every country is different. For instance, I'm Canadian, but when I was working in Germany, it's sort of direct. It's that direct communication. It's very transparent. In China, things are more, let's say, indirect and descriptive in terms of coming to alignment, understanding what people want. Here in Dubai, we've got 19 nationalities working in our office, and it's to ensure that you have an inclusive environment. I think at the end of the day, the one common or the red thread between all of the places that I've worked is that you have open, authentic, and clear communication, right? And make sure that whatever that message is, whatever you're trying to communicate, that the people within the company or the end consumers understands it, right? But like physically working in these countries, it's the thing that makes or breaks it is always down to just communication, common value systems, inclusivity, making sure that everyone's heard. And yeah, I run a fairly flat structure because I have to have a lot of SME subject matter experts. I'm not a data scientist. I understand what they generally do, but I can't do that as a profession. I'm also not a brand strategist. Do I understand what they do? Generally, yes. So I'm, let's say, T-shaped. I'm a generalist and I can have all of these different conversations and I get how these things come together. So my job is to sort of guide and steer the different teams through communication on what that common purpose is. Why are we doing these things? What's the ultimate objective? So for me personally, it comes down to communication is at the crux of everything that I do, regardless of country, nationality.
I'd love to touch on communication because I think that's an important part here. When you say communication, are there some practices or frameworks or general rules that we should follow? Because one of the hardest things for a technical person to do is communicate their technical expertise. And likewise, I feel that I might want to explain something and it could potentially be a straight line, but when I'm explaining it feels like a zigzag when I could be very succinct in the way I explain it. Is there a way to communicate?
There's a couple of ways. One, how you do communications, it needs to be accessible. So regardless of if you're a technocrat in this specific area or if you're a generalist or you're completely new to it, it needs to be explained in a way that everyone can understand it and can use that as the brief, right? I do a lot of visuals. Also, I'm a visual learner. I'm left-handed, I'm right-brained. So I remember things as visuals, but pictures is worth 1,000 words, right? So I draw a lot. I'll just get out the marker and we've got glass everywhere and I'll just scribble on the glass to make sure that visually everyone gets it. And then ultimately, when the teams are about to go away, I usually get them to explain it back to me and explain it to the group. Because we have also, a lot of ESL here, English as a second language, and so there we have, let's say, multi-speeds of where people are at. Right. And that usually those three things, keep it simple, plain language, visualize it if you can, and get them to explain it back to you. Those are kind of the three things that I do.
Brilliant. I love it. I love it. I'm so glad I asked that question. I'd love to talk about marketing and marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Are there some marketing strategies that have worked and out of them, what are the ones that were really unconventional that come to mind?
I think for me, the ones that work the best are when it's a clear brief from the client. So one of the things that it's a difficulty in the space that we work in is that we're bridging the gap between business, marketing, and often technology, the IT department. And these three, let's say, silos or departments often aren't aligned on what their objectives are, or they have specific objectives that may not look left and right to what the other, let's say, stakeholders' objectives are. So if they're aligned on the client side, on our partner side, traditionally over marketing the business, so sales, for instance, and IT, there is a clear brief to us. And then in that brief, there's clear things that they want to hit. So performance marketing, let's say, clear objectives that they have that are measurable is critical, because often what we do requires business transformation, technological transformation, and big budgets are required over several years. So you have to sort of prove your worth. There has to be a return on investment. And the only way that you can do that is through measurability. So if you're not able to identify how this is going to impact the business or the brand, that is going to be a problem. And when you hit the sweet spot, it's when there's a clear brief, all the partners are aligned, and it can be measured through activities that you're doing specifically. That's when you're going to have success.
Yeah. What's the best way to extract that brief out of a client? Because a lot of the times they don't even know what they want. I mean, a lot of the times they can't even imagine what that future looks like.
Yeah, a lot of times you have to write it with them because they're going into completely uncharted territory. They may know their discipline very well and they may be leading the writing of the brief, but there's other departments that probably have to pay into it and they may or may not be communicating with them. So you also have to be a facilitator. You have to be the connector. You have to help them talk with, it sounds funny, but a lot of times we'll go into a company and we will end up talking and basically bringing together relationships and partnerships internally on their side. Because they have to, right? You can't not, and they've traditionally never done this. There's so many dependencies there that if they're not considered and if they're not consulted. So again, it's making sure that how we often do things is we'll kick off a relationship, we'll write a brief to what ultimately we want to achieve at the end of it, and then one of the first upfront activities is stakeholder interviews to then talk about that brief and talk about what that output should look like. And at the end of that, it may look different than that initial brief, but then at the end you have a brief that's aligned with all the different stakeholders, and then you can run the project.
What are the ways that we can look at measurability, especially from a small business perspective, a founder that has, created a company, has got a team and has to worry about all these new spinning plates? How can they look at measurability and kind of understand whether the marketing they're doing is actually returning on investment?
You have to get creative. A lot of times the best way, because we operate in the tech space, everything's facilitated through a technology, and so it's always recorded. You always have the data that you can recall and call back on. So we have clients, for instance, where we are running a call center solution for them to help other markets where we've democratized, let's say, assets across markets. And they're coming back to us and, for instance, requesting help, requesting various assets. But through those interactions, we can kind of see what the demand of the market is. And we can start understanding the volume of demand.
What role do you see AI playing in marketing and customer engagement, especially like right now and maybe into the future?
It's reshaping our industry. It will definitely supplement parts of the value chain, of the marketing value chain. It will make things a lot faster in terms of like idea generation, maybe multiple executions of a single idea, right? Like when you're talking about personalization. So definitely it's going to help with that, with automation. Will it completely replace, let's say, creatives? No, I think that because there's so many things that AI cannot, replace. There's a lot of contextual things and things that might not be able to be measured within an AI engine. It is causing a big stir in the marketing industry. I think creative businesses, the thing with our business is that we deal with data, technology, creative, so we're kind of already in this space. It's just going to enrich our business model. I think creative peer play agencies are having a big rethink right now on how they can bring this into their business quickly.
How do you see AI playing the role in the enrichment of the business model?
For instance, so maybe when it comes, we run a framework, right? And you always have initially, some form of a discovery, right? Where you might do competitive research, best practice, benchmarking. There's internal activities that you're doing as well. And then there's always sort of, let's say, an imagine or an ideation phase, right? And it's by and large, the industry runs like this, and then you design and then you implement.
Sure.
Those first two phases will probably be impacted the most because you're taking the ideation phase, you're taking the phase of like, what are all the possibilities and distilling it down into a couple of, let's say, really strong options. That whole process is going to be reduced, right? Because the power of AI, you can run these huge models to take all the possibilities and start reducing. And then ultimately then I think a human is going to have to come in and say, okay, I think these are best suited for the business. You're still going to need a human, but that whole process of ideation and discovery, I think definitely is going to be impacted by AI.
When you remember the first time you saw artificial intelligence in a tool, or what do you remember and what was the experience like?
I think a programmatic, within media was probably something that was, now that's not AI, but that's something that where you're using data, and I think that was a pretty powerful technology. Programmatic media buying is something that was very, very interesting. I think also Amazon, I remember, when Amazon first came out and they had the recommended products. That's not AI, but that's machine learning, that's analytics, that's predictive, right? So that was a beginning of where you're like, wow, this is really interesting. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is powerful.
Yeah.
This is going to change a lot of stuff. And now you just see it everywhere, right?
Right. This year, artificial intelligence has been used a lot. There's a lot of people talking about it. There's a lot of new tools coming out. Have the team here started to use it? What's the status of where RAPP is at?
Yes and no. We do use it in some instances, but at the end of the day, the client is paying for our time. They're not, and these tools can help enrich the process, but they can't replace it. And there's a slippery slope, I think, in terms of how quickly and how deeply you integrate these tools to help with your processes, to where you're no longer doing the hard, heavy lifting and you're just, getting a tool to do it for you. And I think you have to be very careful. So we are implementing things. I think one of the big things that we're going after in 2024 is DCO, so dynamic creative optimization. So really stitching together creative content with data, that whole process of meta tagging data, that's super interesting for us and how that manifests itself.
Yeah.
So taking, let's say, one master creative work and making multiple, let's say, variations of that, that's interesting for sure. And I think clients will be happy to pay for that. But the heavy strategic thinking, we still try to, as much as possible, have the human do it.
Yeah.
With bits and pieces enriched.
You mentioned slippery slope, and that's a really interesting conversation. At what point do we start to say or look at this being an augmentation of our intelligence as opposed to replacing the human intelligence?
So for instance, some of the vaccines that are coming out, I know that the pharma is using AI in a very meaningful way. And, I think COVID, for instance, the vaccines there were multiple vaccines that were developed in, record-breaking time, and they were using massive data sets and artificial intelligence to kind of drill down on that. So I think that there's some really good real-world application. Human error, I think, is augmenting or supplementing to ensure that human error isn't coming into it. I think it's about transparency and people understanding how you're using the technology. So in our company, if we use it, when we use it, we will tell the client how we're using it and why we're using it. And if they're okay with it, then we will proceed. And I think if there's general consensus with the stakeholders who will feel the byproduct or the output of that, then that's fine. Yeah. But I think it's just to make sure that everyone is aware that these applications, these systems, these technologies are being used directly or indirectly for their businesses. I think that's, right, for me, my use case. Yeah. I think that's the big thing is to ensure that everyone's comfortable with its use and its application.
When you're looking at AI, what are the things that I'm asking these AI questions primarily, yeah, because of the data part side of things that you're so involved in, I think, and yeah, that is easily the bottom layer before you get to artificial intelligence is business goals first, then what is the data that is being captured, and then once the data is captured, how is the data cleaned, yeah, up and how is it used? Data provides insights provides a story, right? And then that narrative usually justifies other things, a brand strategy or whatever. If I'm looking at data, which then ladders into insights, and I can't explain or I can't understand what that outcome is or why that data is explaining a certain story or an insight, if I can't understand it, then I don't usually use it for a justification, a personal justification. So, for instance, we'll get an insight that comes out that doesn't really make sense, yeah, through the data. And none of us can really understand it, like the senior analysts or whatever. So we will go back into it to understand it. And a lot of times then there's a calculation error, right? Or there's an error in interpreting the data. So intuition is super important, right? Like we are supercomputers ourselves. Don't just trust the data blindly. And definitely don't just trust artificial intelligence blindly. If it doesn't make sense, dig back into it and try to figure out why does this not make sense. And then maybe it's your logic that needs to be updated. Love it, love it. I want to land this plane, so let's talk about leadership philosophy, because I think that is massive. Talking to you, getting to know you, yeah, seeing how you care so much about inclusivity, and you're leading such a diverse and talented team here. What's your philosophy when it comes to leadership? When I was younger, I'd read all of these, sort of leadership books and stuff, trying to go through, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Do I have the imposter syndrome? Do I not? Whatever. And the more that you fail at some things, you succeed at others, you start forming your point of view. For me, it's open, transparent communication, and your employees need to trust you, and you need to lead from the front. You need to do the heavy lifting as much as they are, right? And when they see that you're leaning in and you're willing to go the extra, but I also feel that, switching off on the weekends and having that private time and having that time for your family, for your friends is crucial as well. So, and I communicate that. So mental health
is a big thing. And that kind of just goes into those open, transparent, leading from the front, having those conversations that their previous leadership wouldn't have with them, and take away the ego. You might be good at one thing, but there's this person sitting right next to you is much better at the next. So just, be humble and be there to help.
Last question. When you joined, there were 12 people, and now you're expanding quickly. You're the rainmaker, you're bringing in business, and I can see the excitement when new business comes in, when you talk about it. I love it. I love it personally when it does. What do you think was this, if there is a single factor that contributed to the success of you being the president here and your growth here, what would you attribute it to?
There's a couple things. One, there was a space in the market that really didn't exist. It existed, but there wasn't a lot of players in it. So I think having a clear USP and owning that space authentically. And we just put a lot of work into delivering, really representing quality work in an inclusive environment and really partnering. We don't really believe in the service provider relationships. When we look for partners, because we do turn down opportunities as well, when we look for partners, we look for partners that mirror and reflect our sort of principles and ethos, So, and I think that, that massively helps, and then that word of mouth just naturally goes. So it took about a year and a half to really start gaining traction, but post that now it's been pretty rapid growth, which is great. Yeah. And let's hope it continues.
Yeah, man. Let's hope. Thank you. This has been a little slice of heaven.
Yes, man. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
No, dude, this is amazing.